So you guys should be able to see a screen that just says welcome back. If you can nod and thank you for just for confirming that. I love the way that Matt kind of set this session up, and when he was talking about it, he was like, yeah, we get Craig and Karen on, brilliant job as ever, showing how to set up Business Central, customer engagement, and do that integration between them. And then his suggestion was, why don't we get a couple of geeks to talk about Business Central and customer engagement and some processes? And I think Scott and I kind of fell into that category. So the intention of the next hour, 90 minutes, however long we choose to take on this one, is to be interactive, to try and think about the efficiencies and why we should do some of the setup that we've talked about, where we can go with that, talk a little bit about the kind of Dynamics ecosystem and Microsoft and how everything wraps around together. Just before we jump onto that, Scott, do you want to do any introductions, by the way? It's kind of rude of me just to jump straight in there and start talking.
Yeah, I mean, so far so good. I think we're a bit into it. I'm sure people will get a flavor for me and for you as we go along this afternoon. But just to reiterate what Ed was saying, we do want to keep this interactive. Certainly, you don't want to listen to us go on and on too much. So please keep the questions coming through. Matt can definitely jump in and interrupt if something is really salient or relevant to what we're talking about at the time, or we'll take a pause here and there just to go back and address some of those questions. Also, keep the emojis going, the thumbs up, the heart, the laugh, any of those things. It just helps us know that you guys are engaged along the way.
And thank you, Mr. Batterby, for asking in the chat there. Let's ask some really complicated questions. Honestly, far away. We try to keep the slides absolutely to a minimum. We're not diving into live demos because we just really want the slides as a bit of a backdrop to the conversation that we're going to have. Couple of things. I think we were all trying to make sure that we got the references out there, just as a reminder on the great work that Craig and Karen have just shown us. The resources available to everybody, be that as a partner, as an end customer as well. We've just shown setting up trial environments, and this is one of those areas around ERP and customer engagement that I guess used to be quite a big challenge. We'd go looking for a new system, we'd maybe go out to RFIs, RFPs, tenders, and try and map out all of our requirements, either as partners, maybe moving from Modern Workplace, or as end customers. The experience with Microsoft now is to try and make that as simple as we possibly can. So I just put on the slides there just for reference. Again, CDX, Transform and Trials and docs.microsoft.com, where Matt encourages people to ask difficult questions. The breadth and the scope of Dynamics is pretty enormous right now, and docs.microsoft.com becomes my best friend several times in every day when somebody's asking, how do I do this? Can you give me some guidance? Where's the documentation on this? One of the cool things about that is that within Business Central, for instance, if you hover over a field, it's going to show you what that field means. If you want more detail behind how you set up and configure that field, you can click on the link and it drives you straight into docs.microsoft.com. So it's not like you've got to go searching for things all of the time or write the questions down and copy and paste. It really is at the interactive level where all of the documentation is absolutely up to date. Using those resources within the experiences on CDX Transform Microsoft, not only can we create those trial environments, they come pre-populated with data so that we don't have to work really hard to get into a demo situation. There's a lot of play-by-play interaction in there as well. It really is worth exploring. When you go in, there are drop-down lists to take us into BizApps, to explore Business Central or customer engagement, and things like field service and human resources, for instance, where typically you need to have quite a decent level of expertise to get into the application and learn it, configure it, and go through and present the benefits to an end customer. There are lots of kind of play-by-play sales motions in there. Some of them simply link back to PowerPoint so that we can show the transactions as it goes through with a scripted demo. So what I would suggest is, if this is an area that you're looking to explore further, if this is building a practice or looking at specific products, go in there, have a look, select any of the application areas and really just see what's in the background. Scott, you got anything to add on that?
No, I think you hit it pretty well, Ed. I do know, though, and this is something that we talked about kind of coming into today, that sometimes just the idea of doing a demo for somebody can be a little bit of a mixed message right from the jump. So definitely one of the pieces we want to talk about is just how to position these demos and how to really leverage these resources to drive a conversation around the sales process and to make sure that you're managing expectations along the way. Because we can show you these different apps, right? And we can show you how these apps connect to each other, but they become an actual solution once you put it into the context of a customer or a potential client's business environment and what they're doing every day. So I think the best way to approach a lot of these things, and some of what we'll share with you today, whether it's the afternoon or morning, depending on where you're coming from, is how to use these tools really as that teaching mechanism so that you can learn a little bit more about the client and the customer. They can learn what's available, and then together you can start to piece together a solution that's going to work for them.
Yeah, cool suggestion. Just reading from Osvaldo there. If we can just copy those links into the chat. Scott, I don't know if you can do that rather than me.
Yeah, I'll take care of that right now. No problem.
Exiting the presentation and moving that one on. One of the key things, I guess, about these trial environments, CDX as well, learning by using and then becoming familiar with the applications and being able to do a demonstration. This isn't always about customer-facing demonstrations. Really learning by doing. I think one of the phrases that we tend to use within Ingram is drinking our own champagne. Ingram Micro, we're a global organization. Thousands of us use the same CRM application. I'm delighted to say it's Microsoft Dynamics for our CRM. It would be pretty horribly embarrassing if we use something else. Learning, using that on a day-to-day level gives us that familiarity, gives us the stories to tell, and that sort of learning by experience. That's something that we can absolutely pick up with those trial environments. They're very, very quick and easy to spin up, and either, I think, 30, 60, or 90 days typically. But Business Central, we can have like a 1-year environment as well. It gives us the chance to get some data in there, do some playing around, and just keep revisiting that. So I didn't want to spend too long sort of recapping on the great work that Craig and Karen have done. But Scott, you mentioned solutions. It's not really about applications. We're talking about solutions. And how do we drive efficiency? And you know what, I'm one of those really irritating pre-sales guys. Whenever I'm talking to a prospect or a customer who's looking to migrate systems, it's one of the favorite phrases that comes out, isn't it? I ask somebody, why would you change? What do you want to achieve out of this? And the first answer is usually improve efficiency. And that's where I become a real pain in the neck, because I'll be going like, why? Why? And what do you want to do? What is it that we're going to measure 6 months down the line when we've done this successful implementation? You've been up and running for a while. What kind of efficiency is it that we're going to measure? Assis, you asked the question earlier on, maybe linking two systems. How do I take a sales order from one system, don't have somebody rekeying it, and then bringing something from a legacy old system that maybe doesn't have an API interface? How do I bring that into Business Central, for instance, and have it fully integrated with inventory control and finance? So I think where we want to go in the rest of this session, I'll try and stop saying in the next hour or 90 minutes or 2 hours, depends on the number of questions that come through, is really think about the solution. So the reason I put this graphic up on the screen, these are all modules within Business Central, but we also use it to focus on line of business applications. So we've got this great SMB solution coupled with the customer engagement experiences, where we can run an entire SMB solution off one package or two packages. We can integrate Dataverse, as Craig showed us, for reporting. We've got Excel, we've got Power Platform. And realistically, this is my very cut down version. I think, Scott, you've got a slightly more complex, structured presentation a little bit later on. my simplified cut down version to suit my little brain and the way that I think. In terms of the Dynamics ecosystem and everything that we've got access to, I think one of the brilliant things about Microsoft is that it's a single sourced author. I don't think there's anybody else in the mid-market, probably globally, that can look at this and say, hey, you know what, most of your users probably already use M365 because Outlook is the most familiar email system. And on the back of M365, we've got Word and Excel. So the kind of really familiar tools. And again, Assis, thanks for asking the question earlier on, because it gave me a nice intro point into how we can use Excel and how we can go about that kind of integration. And Teams, absolutely, as we're sat in this meeting, we've got a conference going on, we're all using Teams, nice and easy for audio, visual, and sharing the chat, sharing slide shows as we go through. And I think some of the key areas of advancement with Microsoft is how we've got this ecosystem that's becoming more and more integrated as we go through. One of the things that Craig talked about earlier on was coupling records and coupling transactions. So I guess, given that I've got the grey hair and I go back quite a few years in the world of Dynamics, when we launched customer engagement as a SaaS product, that software as a service, everything being cloud hosted, and tried to integrate with NAV that sat on some on-premise server over in the corner, because you know what, we invested 10,000 bucks in this and we're going to use it until it's deprecated to zero. So we'll keep the piece of tin in the corner. The interaction between on-premise and cloud hosted systems with data transfers probably was not that robust a few years ago. Where we're at now with this integrated nature, especially with Dataverse wrapped around this, we've got applications that we can bring together, software as a service. We can build on this with Power Platform and bring in data from third-party storage, things like SharePoint that we're fairly familiar with. So SharePoint, List, and Excel coming into play. So we'll try and touch on some of these areas as we go through the rest of the session. I put the business applications across the top. We focused on a couple of areas there on the top left with Business Central and Sales and Service. Tends to cover about 80% probably of all requirements in the SMB marketplace. It's covering enterprise resource planning, customer engagement, customer service, insights, how we drill down, and we can build on that with AI applications as well. So we're not sort of discounting all the rest of the applications. They tend to push up more towards enterprise level. Exactly the same story applies if we're putting project automation in there, marketing, human resource. These absolutely wrap around customer engagement, and using the Microsoft Dataverse, which is in that middle kind of integrate and expand layer, we've got access to all of that data. And that's why we think about bringing in these third-party applications as well. So if we're using things like Continua for document scanning, we're using Jet Reports, and we've got the web-hosted version. Another good question I probably didn't pick up on before, can we run a report and distribute that? Absolutely, you can do. You can do that within Business Central, and you can automate that process. If you're using Jet Reports, you can spin off one report, distribute it through the web server. Everybody can access it. But one of the really cool things about it, or I think it's cool because I'm a geek really, is that that report that sat within Excel absolutely respects the data security that we built within Business Central. So Scott might be able to drill down into the accounting data. Because I'm more of a manufacturing and a distribution guy, trust me, you don't want me anywhere near your chart of accounts. So why would you let me drill into cost of goods sold on a sales order? So we've got that complete overlap and wraparound, if you will, of security and application. Everything sat on Microsoft Azure, so we get access to all of that power, security, legislative compliance, and then some of the extraordinary things like the bot framework, where AI is becoming so much more important and giving us that kind of ease of access. I've had some fantastic questions this week on AI Builder in Power BI. And when I said docs.microsoft.com is my best friend, absolutely it was. I don't profess to know everything about everything. So great resource tools to drill down into that. So Scott, at this stage, are you happy to take over. I don't know if you want to flip into the deck where you've got that data structure built in, and you're on mute.
That's all right. I only say the bad things when I'm on mute. That way I can keep it nice and pleasant when I'm not. I actually just wanted to show a few more tools. I'll share the URLs with you guys in the chat here too, but I just wanted to point out something. Ed, you brought this up a few times that we can't know everything. We do have to rely on some of those resources that are there from Microsoft to make sure that we're providing good information to our partners. And then of course, they can provide that good information to the end users. But I just wanted to highlight a couple of the other tools that are my go-tos. One of them in particular is a newer site that compiles a lot of different resources. So I'm just going to swap over here. All right. So of course, there's that slight delay there when you can see my screen.
Yep.
Yeah, cool. Got the screen on there.
Awesome, appreciate it. So the first one here that I will share with you guys is the Dynamics Partners Transform site. Craig before was talking about where you guys can access these demo tenants and set things up. And the first place he took you to was the CDX, Customer Digital Experiences. So this is in that same sort of category of these partner sites from Microsoft. But what I really love about this one specific to Dynamics is that it makes it a lot easier to search specific products that you might be interested in. So I've got a general understanding of the whole Dynamics stack. We're going to go a little bit deeper on certain applications because that's what our partners are working with. But if somebody has a question about something like fraud protection or commerce that I don't deal with quite as often, I don't need to go searching for the very best article or the most recent information. I can come directly to this Partner Transform site to make sure I'm getting that info. They're also breaking down various sales plays for a lot of these products. So if you're interested in a specific area or where the market's going, that's a great way to approach these applications without getting into the nitty-gritty with what marketing does versus sales enterprise versus sales insights. It can give you a sense of a whole solution that Microsoft is providing here. And the last thing I'll just point out is they do break down these product pages. So you've got information on building a practice. If you guys haven't gotten started with Business Central yet, or you're looking to build more out in sales, you can focus on the build a practice. They also have information for sales readiness. And then, of course, that go-to-market info where you can pull, either marketing campaigns or collateral to use. And this is going to be all from Microsoft. Now, for those of you that have been working with Ingram Micro Cloud for a while, you'll also know that we have our go-to-market hub where we've got pre-packaged marketing campaigns for you to use. I just wanted you to see what was also available from the vendor here. The other two go-to resources that I want to just at least call out before we jump into some of the other material, we do have the resource hub from Ingram Micro Cloud here, dedicated to Microsoft Dynamics. So this is where you can find information on specific demos, trainings, webinars, and it'll break it down by actual applications too. So a great place to get started if you're looking for videos or some information around that. And the last piece I'll just bring out is the customer stories. I think it's really telling that Craig, before he got into anything about spinning up demos or integrating demos or using these applications, he started with his own personal story of what his experience was working in a call center where he was dealing with that plate of spaghetti in terms of business processes and workflows. I think that's a really great place to start, having that story about how it would impact somebody. But when you're going to a customer, being able to find a case study or a white paper that's more specific to their industry or their vertical, I think is a great way for you to make sure you're well prepared for that conversation. So again, these three resources, the catch-all, that Transform site, the webinars and the training materials from Ingram Micro, and then those customer success stories that you can share with an end user, I think are great things for you guys to have on your radar. So with that being said, I will switch over now, I guess, to a bit of my presentation. And you guys get to Slowly watch me struggle with Excel here, or not Excel, PowerPoint. Um, Give me just a second. Should be sharing in a moment. Cool. And Ed, if you're off mute, just give me a confirmation that you can see it.
Yeah, got that one on the screen.
Beautiful. So this is a wonderful slide deck that I pulled directly from Microsoft. So I didn't have to go and reinvent the wheel here or do a bunch of research on market trends and those things. But this is a slide deck that's really focused on that modern workplace customer and making sure that they can also take advantage of some of the benefits here with the Dynamics 365 for Sales platform. Um, so just to back up a second, when Ed and I were talking about how to approach this afternoon and how to build in that better together message for the other applications from Microsoft, we were really kind of bouncing back and forth between, some of the productivity features and then some of the really rich data features that exist. I personally really like the productivity side of things, not necessarily because I'm an efficiency geek, but because I'm a big fan of social psychology, what makes people tick, what makes people change their behavior, and a little bit more about what's going on behind the scenes with the person themselves. So that's what I'm going to focus on. Ed's going to touch in a little bit more on some of the data pieces and those integrations. But with that in mind, I'm just going to jump into this. One of the things that we're pulling out here is something that actually came up in the chat today, just during our discussion. Why bother using these applications versus just the existing Office apps and what we have there? And so this is information that's pulled from Accenture, from a Gallup poll, and Pace Productivity, but it's very telling. So Matt, I think I saw these exact stats get thrown into the chat, but based off of this research, 59% of those sellers are saying they've got too many tools to work with. So, like, full stop, we're talking about adding a new tool to an environment or adding a new tool to a sales system when we already have data that there's a bit too much out there already. 50% of those sales workers don't really know what's expected of them day to day. It means folks are logging in, checking in, and then they're waiting for something to happen, or they're going to get pulled in a million different directions if they don't have a sense of what their workflow needs to be. And then 64% of the time for sellers is spent on non-selling activities. Some of this will definitely get addressed just by those integrations and building out a more complete workflow. But at almost 2/3, it's clear that there's something else that's going on here. So what's happening and what we're dealing with, it's not just the financial capital that we deploy, but it's also that human capital that's going into work, your actual sellers and your sales managers, and then it's also their attention capital. So every day we're working off of these machines that are just full of other distractions. We have frictionless communication now with instant messaging and with emails, but oftentimes that frictionless communication means that our everyday knowledge workers and our sales folks are constantly being interrupted and pulled in different directions. So the actual cost, the impact of these stats is a 14% decrease in that performance from a seller. We're also today dealing with more complexity in modern sales. So we're talking about 10 people being involved in a purchase decision. Most folks feel like these things are taking much longer than expected. I'm not quite certain what people's expectations are, but at a 97% factor, it's clear that all of us are doing a really poor job of actually forecasting how long something is going to take to close. And then, of course, we're dealing with these internal complexities as well, meaning not a well-defined process and very good likelihood that folks are spending more time on other platforms. So this is where we get to a little bit more of our pitch, right? The idea is we're working with somebody who's already comfortable with this Office suite of applications, and we want to show them how we can actually tie in and layer in Dynamics 365. The real message around Dynamics 365 for sales, though, is that Salesforce automation. So taking away that question of what am I supposed to be doing today? What is the priority for us? Eliminating the need to switch between the application you're working out of and a web browser to go searching down answers to obscure questions, right? Having all of that built into a single application and that one pane of glass is going to help increase that seller performance. And when we talk about things like data security and the ability to just edit something in Excel and have it reflected in your database itself, I think it's really important too to mention that this is all wrapped inside of Microsoft's security. So Azure Active Directory, Azure AD can still be used, of course, to set up your users, but then within the environments, you can also have a very granular security on what people have access to, what they can change, what they can report on, and those sorts of features. And now here's the bit of the demo. So this is as far as I'm going to take you in terms of live demos. And again, it's utilizing the slide deck that was available directly from Microsoft from that Transform site. So the first thing that we have here, if my presentation will work for me here, is just a quick walkthrough here on the integration into the Office client, or the Outlook client. So right from within Microsoft Outlook, you can actually have access to your Dynamics database. You can manage opportunities, and you don't have to switch between one tool and another. The same features are also available within Microsoft Teams. Ed is going to touch base on Teams a little bit more in a bit. When I hear about a Teams integration, typically I'm picturing just a surfaced web page. And that's absolutely the case here, where you can just have your Dynamics environment living as a tab in a Microsoft Teams channel, but you can also work on specific records from within a team group. So if you have a case management team that's working on something, or if you're working with an organization that maybe has a more complex sales process, a few cooks in the kitchen, a bit of a project management component too, leveraging the integration into Teams could be a great thing to build into a conversation. And then the last piece here is also pulling in some of that Power BI reporting that's available and surfacing that within your Microsoft Teams channel too. Now it looks like the slide presentation wants me to show you everything all at once. I'll back out of that real quick. When it comes to seller workflows, we have a quick example here of actually interacting around a particular record within Microsoft Teams, having that conversation back and forth. This means that the discussion and the materials and the documents associated with this particular record don't exist in 3 or 4 separate email chains back and forth. It doesn't live hidden in somebody's desktop who may or may not be at work today. We're creating a collaborative workspace where files and conversations can all be shared around that particular workflow. Of course, we've got our integration into Word, but what's also really great to bring out here early on in a discussion about Dynamics is that we've got this mobile application as well. So everything that we're working with has that mobile bit capability. I will sometimes lose sight of how valuable that is for a lot of folks. At this point, I feel like mobile capable is an expectation most people come to the table with, but I will often neglect to highlight that as a feature in Microsoft Dynamics. So do keep that in mind too. And again, the point of these slides is not for me to engage in a really in-depth discussion about what it's going to look like in the customer scenario. The goal here is to show them what's possible, to show them what's already been built and the checkboxes that they can easily work through when they're trying to figure out what their full solution is going to look like. Another piece of this that I like, but a partner should be cautious of too, is that the this particular deck also highlights the ease of being able to get it up and running and to configure it. I think it's important for our partners to level set with an end user. Yes, these things are much more approachable than they were in the past with the resources available from Microsoft, especially that docs.microsoft.com site. You can accomplish a ton without having a technical experience or a background here. But I think there's still very much a place for our partners to be involved. And what we see is that when an end user just tries to bootstrap an implementation and figure it out on their own, they're going to get frustrated pretty quickly. But at the same time, it's good to show an end user that these things are available, that if they do have staff that are accustomed to the Dynamics platform, that there's tools that are there for them. And then the customization and the ability to really modify what the application looks like, that's what's being highlighted in that center picture. I think that's a really valuable thing to bring into a discussion too, that you have a lot of control over what the application looks like, what is visible to a user, and how they can interact with those materials. Last piece to this deck is kind of the standard Gartner Magic Quadrant, highlighting Microsoft's position there at the leader of the pack when it comes to these cloud applications. I think this is an important thing for some of the business decision makers that are out there, but it might not apply as much to your frontline workers, the folks that are actually using the system and the management that's depending on a system for reporting. So it's still a great thing to have as part of the discussion. But for me personally, I tend to stray away from these unless somebody asks about it. We're also building in a few of these case studies on specific companies and use cases. I think this is valuable to have if it relates to the particular customer. Minnesota Vikings, I'm personally a fan of now because they gave us our star receiver at the Buffalo Bills, Stephon Diggs. So for those of you that aren't in the US, I apologize, but American football is a pretty common topic of conversation for us here. Also have a use case with them. And then, of course, a wrap up with some more materials. Now, this is your standard presentation to pull off of a Microsoft site. But what I'd like to do is really use this first portion as a way to educate somebody on what's possible and what's there. And then I pull in some other some other slides from Microsoft to really start to explore what does the end user have going on and what does their system look like. So from here, I like to transition into the digital ecosystem. And oftentimes when I see Dynamics presentations, this is where the conversation starts. People start with sort of the spaghetti imagery of a current company's digital infrastructure, where they have possibly separate applications for all of these various business processes. I personally like this slide to really just live there while we discuss the current state of an end user's ecosystem. We might be here just to discuss one of these pieces. Maybe we're just here to talk relationships, or it says patience in this particular slide that could easily be vendors or constituents or something like that for a different scenario. But I think this is a great way to just start to say, what are you guys doing today to manage some of these processes? And what you'll find is that oftentimes an end user is just coming up with more and more applications that they use. Oh yeah, and then I think there's Jean, she likes to organize things in MailChimp, right? You end up with a situation where you don't just have the organization's technical structure, but you also have people using these third-party applications, and oftentimes things just get dumped into an Excel sheet and people work out of there. But having a slide that can kind of frame the various areas where technology might be touching a company today can really help you discover what their current ecosystem looks like. I use that word ecosystem for a reason. I encourage you to use it as well. I tend to have a bias, Ed, I think you're probably the same way here. I tend to have a bias where I think the technology is really cool. I think it can solve a lot of problems for us, but it doesn't mean it's going to, right? Think of technology as not just being additive. We don't just take something good and make it better, but we are introducing a new species into an existing ecosystem. And if you're not careful with how that could disrupt the food chain, so to speak, you could end up with more complications and really leading to some of those early slides that I showed you about the complexities of people's businesses, how sales folks feel like they have too many tools. We don't want to add to that problem. So let's first start by getting a big picture of what their environment is, and then really from there, drilling into what a customer's business process looks like, in particular on this case, around sales. So I do like to show the big picture. I will typically transition that into another Microsoft slide, just saying that Microsoft has identified these workflows and these patterns, and that's where they've built the various solution areas that we see in Microsoft Cloud. And so everybody should be very familiar with that center one, our Microsoft 365 apps, our productivity applications, right? Maybe not as well known for a typical end user as the infrastructure side, but when we're talking business applications, I really like to emphasize the fact that this is all part of the same Microsoft Cloud. We even play around with the term third cloud here when we talk about Microsoft Dynamics and business apps, but it's best to really kind of think of that unifying message that this is all just one Microsoft Cloud. So with that, I jump into the classic example sales process slide. This is one that I pulled directly from a presentation from Craig and Karen, and it is incredibly boring and incredibly useful all at the same time. So this is, in a nutshell, what every sales process looks like, and this is a great way to really anchor a discussion about what an end user is doing today. You will see that things naturally will fall into some of these stages, and it's easy enough to then adapt a more personalized demonstration to what an end user is actually doing. With that, I feel like I've kind of gone on a sprint here, so I'm going to pause real quick and just see if I lost everybody or if anybody has any questions.
I think despite Matt's encouragement to try and come up with some really tough questions, not seeing that many coming through. I do want to try and just address the question Pramod. And thank you. That was probably the most polite way of introducing a question I've ever seen, to say hello and good evening. It was a question about device licenses. And I think, Scott, this is one that you and I had a couple of weeks ago when we were talking about audit traceability, specifically in Business Central in this case. And I guess we ended up kicking the idea around with that end customer for a couple of days. So Pramod's question was really around, what do we lose in terms of traceability when we've got a single license for a shared device? So that single license just relates to the hardware. So if we've got a terminal that's out on the shop floor, or it's in the middle of a retail shop, for instance, the intention of that is that we pay for one license. It's used by multiple people. So we're not asking each of those individuals to sign in on a separate license. That's where we start to lose the auditable traceability a little bit. When everybody logs into a license for Business Central, that license is allocated against their email address, ties in with Azure Active Directory, and that's where we can switch on audit logs. And audit logs will give us a kind of a before, during, and after picture of everything that we change. So if I'm selling a mobile phone and it's $600, you kind of want to know it was me that went and picked the thing off the shelf and sold it to Scott for the right amount of money. So that's going to be based on my user login. If you've got 5 guys on the retail floor and they're working on one shared device license, either you lose that auditable traceability or you build a little bit more into your process. So you've got to get somebody to maybe scan a little RFID tag or punch in what their clock number is. A slightly more laborious or manual process to doing that. One of the ideas that we did kick around with that customer, Pramod, was if you're moving these kind of high value items around, maybe think about using a scanner that's on a mobile phone or on a radio frequency device. We've got third-party applications for warehouse management. I can only really speak from the UK side on this one. We've a partner on board called Techman, who specialize in warehouse and distribution. So these ruggedized handheld scanners have been around for a long time, up to the sort of IP68 rating, where you literally kind of hit the wall and leave them out in the rain. These things will still carry on working. Running a third-party application on one of those that integrates with Business Central means that to log on, I might scan my QR code or a barcode. I know that's such a common tool now. A few years ago, that was like, whoa, this is so cool. Such a common tool. I know Matt even puts that on his presentations now, so you can scan the code, and I think it links to LinkedIn and Twitter, for instance. So that kind of easy access technology, absolutely out there. And if you use that as a login mechanism, you're going to pay a slightly different license price because it's a third-party app. The benefit could be full auditable traceability against high value assets. So we can kind of balance those off in either direction, Pramod. And one of the notes I did just drop into the chat there was, we've got that opportunity as well of using things like Powerapps. I'm going to come on to this in a few slides. I'm not going to do death by PowerPoint or do sort of deep dive on the process, but I do want to show you a couple of the areas in terms of Powerapps that are well worth thinking about. So I'm just trying to repeat this question as we go.
Just to jump on that too, Ed, the device licenses do get treated very differently depending on which application you guys are looking at. So this is definitely a place where you want to make sure you're reaching out to your Ingram, your local Ingram folks. So if you're here in the US, feel free to message me or the team. Because the sales device license is going to be treated differently than Business Central, where Business Central, those device licenses, you're limited to some certain use cases with it. And I think that limitation's reflected a bit in the pricing for it. Whereas if we look at the sales side of things, that device license actually gives you a full access to the application, no limitations for the user, but some limitations for traceability and auditing, right? Because you now have shift workers moving through the same account. So that's just a great example of where, you know, sometimes you can really kind of get into the weeds on some of the nitty gritty things around Microsoft and how things are licensed or how things integrate. I think that's all very good information for us to have as the technology professionals. But the more that we can keep a customer focused on what they're doing and their environment, I think the better we'll be served in, you know, some of the demo discussions. With that said, I know we're kind of mixing sort of the format here in terms of who our audience is. So
I'm just gonna see. I just kind of popped in just to say hello, but no, I saw Peter's question. Really good question that's come in, and I know Ed, you'll probably add to this as well once I've finished what I'm going to say. But we do have, because Peter, I know you're in the Biz Apps Teams channel, or I'm pretty sure you are. There are some objection handling guides that are in there. But that is a really good question, and essentially a lot of that comes down to the fact that there is a reduced upfront software cost when you're running your business in the cloud, and no costly on-site servers to manage or anything like that. But actually, what we've seen from Dynamics 365 is that for every $1 spent on Dynamics, the return on investment is around $17 for the end customer. So they're being more, as we've seen in this presentation, more productive. They're, you know, being stickier to their customers. Their sales conversion increases, customer satisfaction, employee satisfaction. All these things just start to improve, and it's really improving the return on investment, as I've mentioned. So there's a couple of things in there that can really help from an objection handling perspective, and Ed or Scott might add to what I've just said. But there is documentation in the Partner Teams channel, which if what I will do, if you want to reach out to me, and I can share where that is, but essentially just pre-sales documentation to support with those conversations.
Yeah, one thing I will just kind of add in there a little bit too, Matt. So my background before coming over to Ingram, getting involved with Microsoft Cloud, was actually on the conflict resolution side of things. And so essentially, as a mediator, all I was ever dealing with were objections getting fired back and forth. And oftentimes, when there is an initial objection, it's a surface level piece. It's essentially what they felt like they could bring up, and there's typically other things boiling under the surface. So my recommendation for any sort of objections as they come up is, to acknowledge, but then to immediately inquire a little bit more. I used to have a slide back in my conflict resolution days from the movie Shrek. He's got a line in there. He says, like, ogres are like onions. They've got layers, right? Every objection is like an onion too. There's layers to it. And the more that you can kind of peel that away, the better off you'll be. But if you end up in a situation where it feels like it's a tit for tat, like I'm arguing with you over something, we've gone too far, right? You can take a presentation and turn it into a conflict if you're not really acknowledging what that person's saying and hopefully uncovering what's underneath the surface. So not a very clear direction. It's just to say acknowledge and then inquire is a good first step.
Scott, hi, thanks. I think that was it's a good answer, but I think where I'm getting at is most of the objections, if you like, tend to come from your competitor who might be in there. So they'll throw those at the prospect for you to try and answer. But the feeling normally is that with Microsoft, although it is giving you a complete solution, you have to buy quite a few things from starting with Office 365 and then sales, and then even help desk service, manufacturing if you're in manufacturing, etc., and Business Central. You've got to buy a lot of things. And what other ERP business system vendors try to say is that, well, actually, no, you only need to buy the one thing. The only thing that most ERP vendors aren't very good at is managing Outlook. The emailing side, most people either have to go through Gmail or they have to use Outlook. So that's where Microsoft scores. But that is usually a kind of a common thing used against.
And I think one thing I will say, and I know Ed is dying to speak, so I will keep this brief. But one thing that we see as well is, other maybe CRM, ERP solutions can integrate with Microsoft 365. You can have it integrated with Outlook, but it's not seamless. Sometimes that comes with a cost or time to actually do the development work yourself, or you have to get a third-party application from like AppSource or something like that. So the cost starts to add up. Whereas with it all being under that Microsoft offer, actually, they use the term seamless integration, but even a better term for that is it's embedded. You can embed Dynamics into Microsoft Teams. It's not really, I wouldn't classify it as an integration, even though it is, but it's so seamless, they're embedded. So there's those kind of pros and cons when you look at the pricing structure. Actually, the base license, for example, may be cheaper to get another CRM or ERP solution, but then what else needs to be added on to get some kind of integration with applications that they're already using? That could start to build that cost up, but at the moment they don't see that. That's all I'll add to that.
Yeah, I think I'd just like to add to that just a little bit, Peter, and you're right, it's absolutely a great question. I've worked in ERP for far too long, longer than Batterby's been alive, sadly, but that goes with the territory. And we've gone from the big packages where it was X days of BA and loads of configuration development before users even got near the system, and a sales cycle would be 12 months. And I've worked with some of the lower level systems like Pegasus, for instance, that was designed to be installed on a PC, maybe just some kind of basic networking. But I moved out of sort of ERP for a little while, did loads of stuff in IoT and RFID. When I decided to move back into this world, my choice having worked with Oracle, SAP, Mapix in the past, was quite broad. I chose the Microsoft route, not because I think each of the unique products at that time was the best product that there was, or the prettiest, or had the deepest functionality in it, but because I was looking forward to the roadmap and where it was going to develop. And I think this is really the time now that Microsoft is really delivering on those promises for integration. What I'm going to cover in not too long an amount of time is that integration with the front office, with Teams, with Power Platform, and where we can go. And I think when I'm listening to some of the objections, Peter, if anybody's using M365, that's kind of a sunk cost already, as far as I'm concerned. You're already invested, you're already using it, you've got familiarity with the tools, you've got Word, Excel. Guess what? We're going to use those in your ERP application. So when you want to change the format of your invoice that's going out, do it using a Word template. You don't need to ring me and for me to come back in at $1,000 a day. If only I could charge that much for me. You can do that yourself in Word without any additional cost. Data import using Excel, you've already paid for this thing, so it's a given. And the Outlook integration and Teams now, I will come on the slides, but that's driving so much more value into an organization in terms of the engagement. And I think it's that front office link to back office. So when we're addressing, crikey, I've got to invest a huge amount to get this solution. A lot of the time I'm positioning that or discussing it with end customers as an extension of your existing front office solution. So I'm going from what I use every day anyway, so I'm using Outlook and Teams and Excel and Word, into a finance system or an inventory control system or a project management system. And it kind of moves the goalpost a little bit away from, I've got to go learn this big new shiny ERP system and then figure out how to integrate it with the stuff that I'm already pretty cool at. We're moving that from just kind of stay where you are and you see it in front of the laptop. All this stuff is just rumbling on behind it. And we're going to provide that kind of seamless integration and access to it.
Yep.
There was quite a cool slide earlier on that was kind of like a flow chart, build as you go. It's become, in my opinion, much easier now to address those key target areas. Everybody wants finance, of course we do. Our business is run on finance and reporting. Somebody's got a big problem with inventory control, but they're quite happy with the sales order processing approach. Why don't we get inventory control implemented as soon as possible? Let's get some savings from it, a decent return on investment, and then start to build out. Scott, it looked like you were going to jump in before I carried on.
Yeah, I think I was just going to try and put everything into a little bow. It's that time to value, right? That's available within Microsoft Dynamics. So everybody's going to manage their opportunities or implementations in their own way. But Microsoft has made it much easier to take a more agile approach to these things and to truly do a crawl, walk, run. We're seeing some of our partners use things like conference room pilots, where they basically will just do one quick workflow for you using the out-of-the-box setup. So it's a very low in terms of time investment for the partner. They might charge for this as well along the way, but it actually creates real value very quickly. So when we look at, especially our big vendors, right, SAP, Oracle, there is a much longer time before any of the expense is actually realized as value to the company. And I think that's one thing that Microsoft has done a bit better than them. But of course, there's always those other vendors that we're working against. We don't know what those presentations look like. If people are getting shown, the premium, sales premium versus sales professional, right? On this call, we might be able to identify that, but we can't tell if those other vendors are basically, showing the Cadillac model and selling the Ford. So.
Okay, that used to be the way of demonstrating ERP. Show the Rolls Royce, and then if they got the budget for the Mini, we'll sell them the Mini, but you don't get all the features.
It's a more British example. I appreciate it.
I thought I'd throw one of those in.
Cool.
There's a couple of other questions. Peter, is that okay in terms of answering?
Fine, guys. Thank you very much. Yep.
There's a couple of other questions we can try and pick up. I appreciate not everybody can stay on the call for such a long amount of time, so if we address these questions, then whiz through the slides if that's cool for you guys. So James Kiefner asking about the integrations between D365 Commerce and BC. Thinking about NetSuite and Magento. So I guess I can give you, if you're still on the call, I hope you are, James, I can certainly give you my experience when we talk about D365 Commerce. Commerce is actually an application that's for the bigger retail markets, right? I'm not sure, because there's a reference in there with NetSuite and Magento, James, I'm not sure if I'm not interpreting this correctly, because my experience is using like Magento websites. Listening to somebody having a piano lesson in the background, which is sounding kind of cool. But it's better than my next door neighbours with the washing machine, I've got to say. So I'm impressed with the piano. So Magento website integration. In fact, James, if you're still on the call, if you want to jump off mute and ask the question, please tell us where you want to be with this one.
Ed, the understanding I have in speaking with NetSuite is that the e-commerce functionality that they have integrated relies very specifically on Adobe Magento. Okay. And knowing that in a direct conversation with Adobe, the Magento itself is a very expensive solution to develop in terms of a working model for buying and selling anything, without considering the financial management of what that website is going to feed into. So NetSuite became very interesting to me because I liked the best of breed Magento capabilities, even though they may be dumbed down a little bit as NetSuite has integrated them, but it is connected to their financial management capabilities. And that's why I thought, okay, well, if I start looking at this comparatively, it seems to me like the good test of my purpose here is if I want an e-commerce facility and using Dynamics 365 Commerce, I've got to then see or have that coupling that's done very well with financial management tools in Business Central for it to pay off.
I can absolutely speak to my experience, and Scott, jump in whenever you feel you want to. I've done, when I say I've done, I have been implementing and doing pre-sales and account managing on quite a lot of Magento websites integrated with both NAV and then Business Central in later life. And that integration, I've certainly not found a challenge. The opportunity is always, I think, understanding the process of what we want to push out onto a website. So if I'm selling, I'll go back to the mobile phones again. Maybe I want to push out my inventory level from Business Central up to the website so that people can see what they can buy in real time, get the order placed, and that's a simple kind of web form to pull down from Magento, and bring that in as either a quote or a sales order that's either automatically or manually accepted into Business Central. So a lot of that, I think, is driven on where you keep your customer data, whereabouts you handle it, things like finance, for instance. So if somebody's ordering on a website and I don't know them, I'm not just going to auto accept an order. I want some kind of credit checking going on before I allocate this. Magento's far better at handling credit card payments, for instance. We don't store the credit card data in Business Central, or we push it out using a third-party application. So in my experience, we're using a Magento website to be the front end for sales order processing and a portal mechanism for sharing whatever data we want to push out onto the web. The reason I use the word portal was also to introduce the idea of Powerapps portals, which is now well worth considering. So we can use a Powerapps portal in the same way that we would do with a website. Easier to write, easier to configure, easier to customize and maintain going forwards. And we can use a portal that's accessible. So if you're selling to known customers, for instance, James, you could give them a log on to a Powerapps portal, allow them to do their sales order processing through there. And because you're controlling what's in the portal, when they're logging on, if I'm a business owner, I'm going to push out the list of outstanding invoices because I want these guys to see how much money they owe me when they log on. Maybe a list of outstanding sales orders, deliveries that are due, any promotional material that I want to push out there. So I guess in a very roundabout way, I hope I'm kind of answering your question, if not 100% directly. We've got a whole raft of different options using Business Central and e-commerce integration. Rather than just being packaged up in one offering, we've got huge amounts of flexibility, including the Powerapps portal, Power Automate to go and grab data and bring this thing in, as well as I've worked with some organizations where batch processing was agreeable because real time wasn't necessary. So overnight, we can push some things out to our website. 3 times during a day, we pull sales orders back in. Scott, do you want to kind of supplement what I've said?
You're definitely more experienced in terms of the delivery aspect. Ed, my just gut reaction though initially is that commerce does live in that unified operations category for us. So just from a licensing perspective, I see Microsoft as positioning commerce really to work with finance and operations, or what was once AX, in terms of the Dynamics application. So that was it in terms of my extra highlight.
So Ed, do I read wrong then that I'm not considering Dynamics 365 Commerce equivalently with Adobe Magento?
Yeah, so the specific commerce package is designed for that large retail environment. So we've got multi-channel, omni-channel, whichever phrase. I always get a little bit confused around which one to use at the right time. So the commerce package of itself, James, is quite a big package, and it's more intended to hit that that kind of enterprise level. In fact, I haven't got it on my slide deck, so I can't show you on the fly. So I think the commerce package is more intended to hit that enterprise level. Down at the, I'm going to say the SMB level, there's massive scale in SMB here because Business Central can scale from a single user to hundreds of users. It typically tops out around the 300 users, depending on the kind of license mix and what we're doing with Power Platform as well. So if I'm a business owner and my view of e-commerce is how do I transact from my website, through that kind of digital presence, I'd look at website integration as a separate project and not be looking at the Microsoft Dynamics commerce package to handle that.
So the marriage that I'm envisioning does occur more with the Adobe Magento and Business Central.
Yeah, absolutely.
Spot on there. Okay, that's a big shift in the way I was looking at things. I just didn't want to take a wrong step or wrong turn and waste another month in studying or analyzing capabilities when I should go full on with those two pieces. Like, it sounds like you've got a good understanding what I want to do from a transactional standpoint, and then scale it out. So
James, one of the cool things that we do, I've got to stop using the word cool, I am a child of the 70s, working for Ingram. We've invested a huge amount in our Dynamics practice. So I guess the traditional distribution model is, hey, we sell licenses and somebody else takes all the pain and grief of making things work, right? So we've invested a huge amount, and like people like Scott, investing massive amounts of his own time to become a Power Platform functional consultant, for which I doff my cap once again. It's about learning about the products and getting that kind of depth in it. We don't do the implementation work ourselves. We work with elite solution providers. And again, we didn't just go out and find any Tom, Dick and Harry. Is that a very British phrase? I'm afraid. Any guy that was on the street. We only work with the very reputable implementation partners, typically Microsoft Gold partners, members of Microsoft's inner circle. So for that kind of question, reach out to us for the kind of pre-sales activity. We can help you with it. We can introduce you to people that do this implementation work for a living. So if we've got that kind of use case scenario, and that goes back to, was it Pradeep that asked, or Pramod that asked the question earlier, where we've got that specific use case scenario, please do reach out to us, and we will try and help get you very specific answers.
Well, in terms of where you also landed when you introduced Powerapps and Power Automate as helping to explain various handoffs of the information between those two separate environments, I like that. That really does hit me right square in the eye. I was worried, in fact, that those features would not be something that that I was not considering at the start of this project, and I'm studying it for the last number of weeks and suggesting, yeah, that's absolutely the language I wanted to hear.
Awesome.
So that's good, and I take your point about the gold implementing strategy-driven partners that understand these environments more fully. And so, yeah, I will reach out. And Scott's part of the American organization, right? Okay, so
that's the guy. I'm going to say go to Scott with difficult questions.
Yeah.
He'll give you all the answers.
Yeah. No, I definitely. You've made a handoff from UK to the US on that one, but it certainly sounds like, yeah, Scott's not going to leave me hanging on this one. I ought to be able to satisfy my requirement and move forward at a much better pace now that I'm not going to waste all this time in D365 Commerce. And
James, you've given me the perfect excuse to jump back into my slide deck, because we've just kind of gone Power Automate. I thank you for that. And I'll tell you what, Caitlin, if we can try and pick up on your questions in a few minutes, if that's okay, because I appreciate, for the sake of timing, not everybody can hang on for all of the time. We are recording the session still, I think. So I promise, again, it won't be death by PowerPoint, but kind of on the back of your question there, James, I want to show a little bit more of the integration. And hey, listen, I think the more questions we get, the better. I know when I was chatting with Scott over the last few days, when we were bringing the sessions together, I was honestly possibly a little bit concerned, because you never know how many questions you're going to get, whether we could just talk for 30 minutes and then wrap up. But no, this is really cool if with this level of interest. So Scott, just give me a nod if you can see the screen again. Cool. Given that Scott had a super complex ecosystem, I always revert to my simplified version, because I guess it helps me frame some of my thoughts around typically the SMB marketplace. And James, based on the question that we were talking about there, Power Automate sits in this kind of integrate and extend layer. And along with Power Automate, we've got more than 400 third-party connectors available to us now in the world of Dynamics. This slide deck used to be really accurate. About 9 or 10 months ago, I had the exact number of connectors in there. Then every month I was updating the number of connectors, and I was changing the picture. And eventually I just went, there's more than 400 connectors available. So what I've done just for this slide deck, I won't bore you to death with the history and the evolution of Business Central, but really this was just to point out that, you know, we've gone from this kind of DOS-based single user, we're on a PC. Of course, we've gone from that up to like mobile phone deployment that's been around for quite a long time, and that was an app that sat on the phone. The modern user interface for Business Central is this role-tailored client that kind of looks pretty cool. It's easy to customize. We've got loads of flexibility. The role-tailored or persona-based approach to how we address challenges now. It kind of goes back to Scott. I love the way you kind of introduced this earlier. You're thinking from the psychology side. How do people interact? How do we keep them, I'm going to say, entertained and engaged? It's avoiding the frustration and the conflict of always going like, oh, I'm battling with the system, right? So how do we make it seamless and try and going back towards Peter's point earlier on, get better bang for our buck, or time to value, or return on investment. Moving from this user interface for an ERP system, I have shamelessly plagiarized some of the presentation material from an event last week. So Microsoft had a new Business Central launch event last Tuesday, and this was actually announcing and presenting some of the new features in Business Central, but not just in BC. This is how it starts to wrap around M365. So really playing on this idea. I think, Scott, on your slides earlier on, you talked about distractions and how a distraction drives efficiency down by about 14%. I've read this so many times. It's like, if I go and check Facebook, by the time I've come back over here, my concentration level has crashed, even if I didn't feel it did, and it takes me a while to get back in. Integration between the kind of front office systems and the back office systems. I don't want to do Control-C, Control-V if I can avoid it. I definitely don't want to write things down. So this is some of the cool stuff. We're not going to go into kind of deep dive demo level here. We've got 2 follow-up events to this. We've got on the 19th of May, a little bit more time spent on Business Central. And on the 16th of June, a little bit more time spent on customer engagement with a sales focus. So I'll certainly endeavour to bring some of these features to the front of our attention. That's terribly phrased. We'll go a little bit deeper on the Business Central event. We'll go a little bit deeper on the customer engagement and sales event to bring some of these to the fore. What I've got on here is just an example on a Teams screen. Teams usage, especially since COVID lockdown, absolutely gone through the roof. Great things about that. When I heard Business Central was going to be exposed into Teams, I kind of went, okay, it's just a front end. It'll look a bit prettier. Where's the productivity? Where's the efficiency? How do I make some money out of this? Sat now within Teams, I can already manage my calendar. I've got my contact lists. And you can see just by going into the search bar at the top with an @Business Central, Power BI and Stream, this is where the integration starts to get great. This is lifted from a presentation that was based around, I'm going to book a meeting with one of my customers. So of course I jump into my calendar, actually can't remember very much about the customer. So before I go in to book that meeting, I can, sorry if I just jump back by one, if I hit @Business Central, it pins it into the search bar. So I'm now searching data that exists in Business Central. There was a great part of the discussion earlier on, because we talked about BC and CRM, 2 separate things, right? And it was pointed out, Business Central has got contact management, it's got account management, it's got a good, if slightly basic, CRM process. So if you're a business with 10 people in the same environment, we probably all know roughly what each other's doing. We can probably shout across the office still to each other. That CRM approach of itself could be absolutely satisfactory for your business needs. When we start to drill down into the data, if you start typing Megan, then we've got that kind of textual search that's going to drill into either an account or a person and bring up their contact details. I'll come back. I'm not sure what you're asking there, Albert, in terms of what is the site link. So using Teams as a front end, by pinning Business Central into the search bar, we've pulled out Megan's details, and we can pop that out as a separate card. We can drill into the details, or, you know, on the bottom of Teams where we've got the arrow, you can just hit that and you can share and you can search the data that you have shared for. By drilling further into Business Central, so if I just go back by one, we know that Megan works for the School of Fine Art. You can pop that out as a separate card, or you can start to drill into those details. So I've gone from Megan's details, who's my contact, into the School of Fine Art. So I've now got my Business Central account card exposed into Teams. And if I want to drill further for the School of Fine Art, I've got all the tiles available to me, and a tile in Business Central is effectively a shortcut. Think of it like a favorites or a landing page on a website, right? the best thing that I would like from my employees is they rock up at 8 a.m., switch their laptop on. I want them to see the most important activities that I would like them to perform during the day. So if I work in finance, it might be collecting debt. It might be contacting those people with overdue invoices. It might be setting up key account meetings with people like Megan and the School of Fine Art. That's where tiles come in. If I'm talking to Megan now, I know it's grayed out right now, over on the left-hand side of the screen, you can see calls within Teams. So within Teams now you can buy dialing plans. So Microsoft provide dialing plans. If you don't want to work with your PSTN phone system, for instance, you can do this all through Microsoft. Didn't quite make the release for Business Central in release wave 1 this year, but this integration, it's not going to be many months down the line. Microsoft always have a cut-off point where they say if it's not ready right now, it's not going to make release wave 1. Guess what? That phone integration wasn't quite ready. It will definitely be in release wave 2, I have been told. Thank you, Caitlin, for Microsoft Business Voice there on dialing plans. Integration with BC means that rather than doing a copy and paste, if I go back to Megan's phone number, rather than doing a copy and paste on the phone, I'll be able to just punch the button and we're straight into a dialing plan. So quite excited about that. It's something we've been wanting and waiting for Business Central. The most exciting thing, though, is, for me, this integration between the business application and the front-end system here. We're blurring the boundaries so much, we don't want people to really see them anymore. This is thinking about that increase in productivity, and I know I can't say productivity, it doesn't sit too naturally with my English accent. When we're trying to increase that productivity, then using a single front-end screen to get to a back-end business application, quite a cool way of doing this. So that full-on integration, it's become a wrapper rather than an integration piece. So we've got one with the other, because ideally what we'd like for our users now is use Teams. You've got your email because that's Outlook just exposed into Teams. You've got your calendar because it's Outlook exposed into Teams. You've got your ERP, your finance system, your customer engagement system, and your phone system coming down the line, all exposed into Teams. I'm getting much more used to using Teams as my entire front office. It's kind of like Windows 10 is kind of sat behind Teams is the way it feels right now. So Teams is my user interface, my user experience. I want to kind of call out, extend, show a couple of examples of some of the great stuff that Craig mentioned earlier on. Maybe it was a little bit confusing for I'm no techie genius, really. It can sound a little bit confusing when we talk about data synchronization between Business Central and the Dataverse. When we come to the process, which is that's where we get the bang for the buck out of any system. When we get into the process, the customer engagement applications were developed on an app framework using the same kind of framework and language that the Power Platform applications were already written in. Business Central came from NAV, used to be written on SQL Azure, using Azure SQL for storage. And now, as it's moved towards the Dataverse, the world of NAV partners and BC partners has been asking for a couple of years. Microsoft, come on, when's this stuff coming onto the Dataverse? When can we get easy, seamless access? This was launched or announced in detail, I think, on Tuesday. Matt kind of called it out because he is a data geek, and the world of Twitter suddenly starts going with this image being displayed from partners going, cool, we can really start to deliver easier, faster, less expensively to get this kind of integration. And what I mean by this is this kind of data sync, getting data into the Dataverse, whether it's via these virtual tables or not, frankly, as a user, I wouldn't care as long as I've got access to data in real time or near to real time. That means we can ease the access for integration to the rest of the Dynamics world, and we can do some cool stuff with Power Platform. And that's where I want to spend a few minutes going on to this, because Power Platform, absolutely one of the biggest buzzes in the world of Microsoft, and an area, kind of going back to your question, Peter, implementation, small chunks, time to value. Often, business intelligence coming back out of a system is one of the longest time to values, because we've got to implement finance and sales and stock and all of the good stuff that goes with it, and then get all the data. And then what do we do with, you used to call it MIS, and then it became BI for business intelligence, all owned by Microsoft. Power BI has been around for a long time. Integration with Business Central has been available. It sits in that role tailor client. It's part of your landing page. Released on, or announced on Tuesday in release wave 1 for BC, which I think comes out July the 1st, if I get my dates right. On the landing page, hit the bit that says Power BI. It's going to check your licenses. It's going to check your connectors. It's going to automate most of the process in the background, pop up a whole bunch of templates that you can use, and then give you some more interesting options rather than just popping up some templates. I'm going to come on to the kind of Power BI side in terms of some development, but I wanted to call this out straight away because Power Automate and Power Apps, you know that bit when I said I used to try and keep the number of connections up to date and gave up? It's more than 400. Those connections have been around for a little while. We're now on to version 3. Version 3 is 25% faster than web services. Apparently, I'll take somebody else's word for that. So please don't ask me to quote the data source on that one. It was on a Microsoft presentation. It's faster because we're not playing through a web service. It's more of a native integration. However, invest in Business Central right now. If you've got Powerapps and Power Automate integration, Power Automate used to be called Flow. If we've got the API, it will be backwards compatible. The older it gets, the more difficult it gets, typically in terms of IT and integration. This stuff is designed to be backwards compatible and make it fairly simple to migrate from web services to new format v3 APIs and give us that kind of speed advantage. And I am starting to speak a little bit quicker because I appreciate time is galloping onwards. Just to give you some examples, I'm not going to play through these in huge amounts of detail, but again, this is going into Flow.Microsoft. So this is using Power Automate. One of the things, it does slightly frustrate me. I don't know about you, Scott. They keep the title as Flow. It's like we've gone from calling it Flow to Power Automate, and as partners, we all had to learn some new terminology. When you go back in, if it still says Flow, it's just a name, right? It does the Power Automate tool in the background. Great thing about this is the Business Central logo. We can connect Power Automate into a number of different environments. For any of you guys that know Business Central, we've had quite a change over the last year or so. Business Central is multi-company, multi-location, multi-geo, multi-currency, and multi-company within tenants or environments. We can create sandboxes and multiple companies. So the connection in this case is simply pointing Power Automate at a sandbox. Contoso is the demo company. You've all seen that with Craig and Karen spinning these things up as we've gone through the day. And this is really working on a rental model. I really like this when I saw it because it resonates with me. I was trying to sell NAV into a rental organization a few years ago. NAV is kind of designed to buy, stock and sell without taking a third-party add-on for a rental application. So there's loads of third-party configuration for rentals, and it was really expensive. We didn't win the deal. We lost to a different organization who'd written their rental model. This is now starting to think about how do we easily configure Business Central to suit something based around rental. This is just a small example of it, but I want to use it to call out the kind of events and the customization. So Power Automate says, if I can write a process down, I can probably automate it. When I said before, I'm one of those pain in the neck pre-sales guys. I've had fights in boardrooms before where I've said, what's your process? Because if you can't write your process down, it's not a process. It's just a guess. If we can write the process down, then maybe we can use Power Automate to take out some of the manual work, the effort, the copy and the paste, the using a screen scraper or a spreadsheet. So going through this process, what we want to do with a rental model is use Business Central to sell an asset to a customer but sell it for a fixed period of time, not forever. And when we do that, I want to create some events. I want to alert colleagues in my Teams channel that I've rented an asset out. I want to create a booking in the diary for that asset to show that it's off-site and it's associated with a sales order that's associated with a customer. We already saw within Teams drilling down into the account level and contact level from Teams to BC. We can do the same for sales orders. So I'm not going to play all of this through, but this is sales order processing in Business Central. I wouldn't rent a desk out. We had to pick something from the demo environment in terms of product. So I've got an Athens desk. We're going to rent this out to a datum, from a date and to a date. And of course, we've got the drop down with the calendar. Of course, we have that's kind of standard, right? So when I complete the product returned date, and whoever asked the question earlier on, we've just changed the label here because on the standard sales order processing screen, that's expected delivery date. Because we flipped this into a rental model, we've changed the label to say product return date. And we did that using the tool or the cog up there that Craig told us about before. So we just changed the label. We're using that date for a different process. And when we enter that sales order, what happens in the background is that workflow kicks off. It's automatic. And rather than having somebody say, I've sold this out, so now I need to email somebody to say I've sold it, I need to go to my Teams channel to update that I've rented this thing out, and I need to go to a calendar to update it for the asset. We just automated the process to say, look, we've got a rental order and it's being created. Guess what? It's against Megan Bowen as opposed to Megan Brown. We didn't get very imaginative with names here, but we can create that sales order. And if we need, we could drill down into the sales order. And again, just to point out, we are sat within Teams for this. And for the Outlook calendar for the asset, we've created a booking in Outlook from the 15th of the month through to the 29th. That's when I expect the asset to come back in. And we've linked it because we've given it the title of the sales order. So a nice simple example of BC integration with Outlook, integration with Teams, integration with Power Automate to create that process. When the asset comes back into me, I want to have some way of registering this. I'm glad that somebody asked the question earlier on. I'm sorry if I can't remember whose name was associated with which question. Handheld device. How do I get something booked back in? Because for my rental asset, I want to know when it comes back into my factory, back into inventory. Great way of doing that is to say, I've got a mobile phone, I've got a connection, I've got a back office system. If anybody's seen any of my Powerapps demos, the one that I did as I was learning Powerapps before Mr. Scott Orange overtook me in terms of much knowledge and kudos, I just linked Powerapps to a Excel spreadsheet, and Powerapps figures out for itself what it thinks you're trying to achieve. It tries to interpret your data, and it comes back with an application that's based around the acronym's CRUD, right? It's create, read, update, and delete. So it tries to figure out rows and columns of data and what we want to do with them. We can now do the same stuff with Business Central, which I think is even cooler because we've got all of that rich data that's in Business Central, it's in the Dataverse. Rather than looking at a spreadsheet and thinking about how do I populate my spreadsheet with data from Business Central, then have somebody access it. If we use Powerapps, and a Powerapps license is not at all expensive on a per user level. So this might go some way towards answering that device level license as well. How do I make sure everybody on the shop floor has got a device, but I don't want to blow the budget just buying them licenses? Maybe Powerapps is something to think about. So we're working on a connection with Business Central. We've already logged in. We've got Azure Active Directory. We've got authorization. The endpoint on that API, and sorry, API is Application Program Interface, in case anybody didn't know, that's my connection for the processes back to the ERP system. My connection is sales orders with rental info. Nice and easy to remember. By connecting to that endpoint, I'm not going to show you the video behind it. Powerapps connects to it in the same way it would do an Excel spreadsheet, takes a look at the data and goes, yeah, this is what I think. I'm going to give you a representation on the front screen with a search engine. It's got text or contextual searching in there with a refresh button and it changes the sort sequence for you. Because I'm a little bit old school and I started world in development many years ago when an abacus was kind of cutting edge, the cost of doing something like this 15 years ago would have been horrendous. And now we're saying you've got a mobile phone and an app and an end user license app. Is it $10 a user a month on the per app plan? Just nod, Scott, if that's, I think it's $10 per app. Pointing this kind of application at the database of your ERP system, and you can enrich that with third-party applications coming into the Dataverse. That's where Craig was going with that kind of synchronization earlier on. So we pointed a basic app at my data. We can create a button which is called Mark as Received, and we actually do that just by picking an option that was set up here. I've not got the thing on the screen that is just Add Button. If you're only good at Excel and PowerPoint, for instance, you're about 60% of the way to creating really cool Power Apps. The reason I mention Excel as well, the underlying language and technology for Excel is PowerFX. PowerFX is the underlying technology for Power Apps, and it's been rolled out to Power Automate, Power Virtual Agent, and Power BI. Great thing about that, the syntax is almost exactly the same. So if you can write some good stuff in Excel, you can create your own Power Apps. So all we do on that one is say, I'm going to put a button on here that's Mark as Received. It links back to my sales order, to my customer number, to a datum. That's where I got my contact details from earlier on. And I can hook it into Power Automate and create a new flow, because when the asset's coming back into stock, my guys in the warehouse, I want them to be warehouse guys, not IT operators. So I don't want them going to a laptop to do some transactions. If I can make it one button, I want them to concentrate on inspecting the asset, make sure it's okay, wrap it in bubble wrap, get the thing back onto a shelf. So putting that process onto Power Automate with an easily accessible device. Sorry, what I should explain from there, when you run this in real time, hit the button, kicks off Power Automate, goes to the diary, takes that asset's booking and completes it, goes back to Business Central, brings it back into inventory. There are some new features that have come in Business Central in release wave 1 to make that in and out of inventory movement a little bit simpler. In the interest of time, I should speak a little bit quicker. I want to bring Power BI into play. Most people have been familiar with Power BI for quite a long time. It's been around. I used to sell Cognos back in the day. Became a standard gag with me. There's no challenge too big for Cognos, nor is there any budget quite big enough for the challenge you want Cognos to address. They were always kind of chasing each other. So Power BI has kind of brought that down onto the desktop and into the enterprise and SMB market. It's very easy to get started with. We can use a desktop version. Power BI Pro allows us to publish the good stuff that we've written. It's, again, been a challenge to us. How do we make all of this rich data available within the world of Business Central and customer engagement? Remember, using the Dataverse, if you've got third-party applications, if you've written Power Apps, that data goes into the Dataverse. We're not searching for all of the good stuff that we've created and stored and imported. It's all in the right place. Awesome. Thank you, Caitlin. I think I'll just keep on talking, and Caitlin's just chucking out those massive bombs there. There's great stuff happening, like with Power BI Premium. It used to be it was like $5,000 a month to get the enterprise version. Had some cool features in, and we've had users for a year saying, "I want that stuff, but I can't afford it." It's now available from Microsoft on a per user per month level. So Power BI, kick it up. We go into Navigator, Contoso Furniture Rentals. It's that same endpoint from the API that we've just used for Power Automate and Power Apps integration with Teams. Nice one. Caitlin, you've just been volunteered, I think is the way Matt should have phrased that one. So we've got Power BI drilling into Business Central. So we're straight into Business Central. Even a total novice user like me can create this kind of chart. I would say I didn't shamelessly plagiarized from the launch event last week. Creating a bar chart with simply into visualizations. The important thing, this kind of goes back to Scott's earlier message, how do we keep people engaged? My view's always been any good Power BI report, any good business intelligence report or query should drive the next question. It might answer one and it should drive you to find out more. So what's going to happen next? So data visualization and representation is a great way of doing that. So I won't pretend to have written this. Using that same kind of data, remember we had contact details for Megan, we had the account details. From that, we've got location details, asset details, the sales order that gave us from and to date. Flipping that data into an interesting graphic is what Power BI is there for. And we can drill down if we're going into states, if we're going into assets, if we're going into timescales, and if we just want to use, frankly, if you want to use Bing Maps, other maps are available, but not if you work. We shouldn't advertise any other maps because we're Microsoft. We'll stick with Bing Maps. It does the job. So generating that in Power BI, then making it a little bit more interesting. This is where Business Central has come on leaps and bounds. Power BI and the interface and the accessibility now from a role tailor client. I've gone into the Power BI reports. I can access the Power BI reports from within my workspace. I think I've got the right phrasing on this one, and say, just go for it. Put that on my landing page. And what's important to me now, trial balance if I'm managing cash flow, maybe the Power BI reports that I want to see and have access to. Again, forgive me, please, if I can't associate the right name with the question. We talked about Excel, Jet reporting earlier on. How do I get those good reports and distribute them? That's a function in Jet. You can go up to Jet Enterprise, you can run things through an IIS server, have it distributed to users or stored in a portal that you access. Or think about this kind of approach. Fairly low cost. Power BI licenses are not terribly expensive. And if accessing data at this level and drilling into the data behind it answers the question, that could be a great way of providing that rich user experience and not costing a huge amount of money either. That's Power BI. I'm on my whistle stop tour and I'm getting right to the end. Just wanted to check I didn't have anything before the final slide. The reason I've got this final slide on here, I'm just going to call this out because it was announced on Tuesday. Data storage has been just a pain in the neck for myself and associates within. I'm glad you lifted your eyes there, Scott, like what's Ed about to say? That was not even going to be colloquial, was it? It's been a pain in the neck.
We've been having a couple calls together. So.
We've had so much pain and grief that we've tried to handle. Business Central as a standard with a tenant comes with 80 gig of data. It was 80 gig of storage capacity in the tenant. It used to be we could use Azure storage to extend the tenant before things moved on to the Dataverse. Now that we're on the Dataverse, that's broken down into data, log, and file. I remembered. Log is one of those things, it kind of goes back to somebody's question earlier on. If I've got a device license, how do I get auditable traceability? When you build auditable traceability, your log starts to increase. Maybe you don't want to keep log storage for too long. We work with a partner who can decrease log storage and move it out to Azure. It's very, very cheap. You get great bang for your buck. You can actually keep all of that audit traceability and still do inquiries on it. Easy to say, keep your data storage low. Don't use stuff that's historical. Trim it down. It's not always easy to do for a business. So the grief that we encountered was $40 per gig per month of additional storage. So when we get beyond that 80 gig limit, it costs a fortune to expand it. Great thing that was announced. I was so happy when I saw this. I'm sorry the image is a bit grainy. It was just a quick screen grab. Me being a little bit lazy. The key thing is the message, not how well your eyes look on that one. Great thing about this is for Dynamics Business Central, that base entitlement sticks at 80, but the more users you buy, the more storage you get. So we've got different levels of license. We've got essentials and premium for every, and you can't mix and match the two within the tenant, I should say. Premium license gives you manufacturing and service. Essentials is everything except manufacturing and service. So if you've got essentials users, you've got 20 of them, you're going to get another 80 gig of storage because it now builds up per user allocation. I should be cynical in my non-sales training kind of way and say, just buy more users rather than worrying about the storage. We'll take the monthly CSP, but it's in my opinion, just a cool thing that finally it's kind of matching some of the customer engagement model to say the more users, probably the more data, probably the more complexity. Let's make it easy access. And the additional data storage after that has gone from $40 to 10. So we're starting to pull this back into a more usable world, in the SMB marketplace. I was trying to keep an eye on the questions as they came through, but then I was just thinking, Caitlin's so cool. You're just answering all of the questions as we go through. So if there's anything we've missed, if anybody wants to jump in, if we got questions around, I realize I was probably galloping a little bit quickly. So did any updates get?
The one thing that jumped out at me that I just wanted to mention is it's come up a few times. Why would I use Power BI when there's already some reporting capabilities here within the application? And I think you highlighted that we can pull information from a completely different database and we can then surface it as a really beautiful Power BI report. But there are some times and there's some things where you wouldn't necessarily want to use Power BI. You'd want to use some of the native reporting features. So I'm going to pull back over to the customer engagement side just to say some of the charts and reports that come out of D365 for sales, they don't look quite as pretty as what you can get out of Power BI, but they're up-to-date information. So this was, in particular, a bigger limitation before we had Power BI Premium per user, which Caitlin brought up in the chat. So prior to that, we were really limited, I think, to only 8 refreshes a day on a Power BI Pro license. And I believe you go up to 20. Don't quote me on that one when you move up to premium, but you're limited, right, with how often you can refresh that data, how up to date it is. So if I'm a sales manager and I need to make sure that my team is smiling and dialing, I want to know how many calls are being made right now. I don't necessarily want to have the report a few days later. And so it's just one piece to bring up. And the other thing, Ed, I love how when you highlighted using that Canvas app for the check-in feature, that you brought up the idea of those Powerapps being a beautiful marriage between Excel and Power Platform, or I'm sorry, Excel and our PowerPoint features, right? Pulling those two things together. And it really highlights kind of the two different worlds with the app development. Some folks are much more focused on that user experience, making things look very pretty, and you can customize them quite a bit to do that. Other people, maybe more like you and me, Ed, we just want the data to work. And so it's really quick to do that piece as well. But the data you can make work with some of those Excel formulas. And then of course you can make it pixel perfect at the end of the day and customize how it looks and feels.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm just on reports for a second, because we don't have to get carried away and say you've got to use Power BI or you've got to use Excel or you've got to do anything. There's a load of standard reports in Business Central. From my implementation experience, I never implemented an ERP system where all the standard reports matched all the requirements of all the users. It simply doesn't happen. We'd have to take those reports, do a customization, modification. You get version 1, 2, 3, version for Caitlin, version for Scott, version for Ed. What we do a lot in Business Central now, and I say we, what Microsoft has released in Business Central, is that a huge number of those reports have got front-end filter screens. So you can build a number of filters and they look straight into the data, and the data's got common sense names about it. So it's called account and contact name and cell number, for instance. You don't need to be a genius to get the report in the right format. You can move the columns around, you can change the sort sequence. Scott, if you and I are both looking at financial data, but I'm in accounts payable, you're in accounts receivable, same data, different views, maybe. my report might look differently from yours. Or if I cover the east side, you cover the west side, we've got geography coming into play. That's the only difference between our two standard reports. I can find a filter set that works for me, the report that works for me, and save it as my favorite on my landing page. So I don't go through the filtering process every time I log in. I just go in and I go hit that tile, here's my report, and I'm good to go. So we don't have to go to Power BI. We don't have to go to levels of jet reports and web services and distribution. The benefit of having it there is that you can grow into it or go to use it. It's kind of back to Peter's question earlier on. How much do I invest up front? Let's attack what's most important and then maybe build on it later. Than the fact that loads of people have got Power BI skills now. So rather than employing somebody to write a report, having it as part of the implementation, once you've got the data, do with it as you choose to. I'm kind of all out of slides. I'm not all out of energy. I'm starting to buzz. It's 20 to 8 at night. I am really hungry, but feel free to keep me away from the microwave if we've got any more interesting questions going on.
Yeah, it's been a very good session, guys. Thank you very much. If there are any questions, feel free to post them in the chat. Again, huge thank you for the engagement that we've seen today. It's been an absolute pleasure to listen in.
Absolutely. And just with that in mind too, we're going to continue the conversation, certainly here on the US side. Feel free to reach out to me. I'll also put our general Dynamics email alias in. Anyone can use that to reach out. I will probably kick you over to the right country team, but the Dynamics 365 at ingrammicro.com is a great place to get started. A lot of the names here today were very familiar to me, but if any of you are here in the US and you haven't met me or chatted with the team here, please do reach out just so we can get to know you a little bit better and make sure that we're enabling you as much as possible.
Yeah, and you'll see I've posted a ridiculously long message as a thank you in the chat on this now, but just so you've got access to all of our email addresses, LinkedIn's, Twitter's, and then yeah, the email address that Scott just mentioned, the Dynamics 365 at ingrammicro.com. So yeah, a huge thank you. If there are no further questions, what I will do, I will stop the recording, and we will we'll close out the session there. But again, just a huge thank you to everyone that attended.